I don't think that I can do this.
Okay, just to be clear, your father's dying, and you're choosing to allow that to occur naturally, rather than subject him to a torturous amount of procedures which would only delay the inevitable.
I just thought that it would be different. And I thought that we'd have more time.
Is your family religious?
Oh, God, no. No, God.
I had a teacher, mentor, who told me about a Hawaiian ritual called ho'oponopono, or the 4 things that matter most. It's basically just a few key things that we can say when we're saying goodbye to a loved one that can really help at the early stages of loss.
What are they?
They're gonna sound really simple, but I swear I've seen them work.
Okay.
I love you. Thank you. I forgive you. Please forgive me.
That's it?
Yep. I told you it was simple.
Hello, all. Welcome back to What's On Tonight, a podcast with elaborate, quirky, and unpredictable conversations about TV, movies, and more. I'm Becky.
And I'm Mandy.
And I'm Wendy.
Tonight, we are covering the Pitt Season 1, Episode 4, titled 10 a.m. Please remember, this is a spoiler-filled podcast, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, just hop off and then come back on and check us out after you finished.
Episode 4 was written by Noah Wiley and directed by Amanda Marsalis.
Mandy, would you care to give us the synopsis for this one?
Sure. While helping a patient's family cope with loss, Robbie struggles with memories of his mentor's final days. Santos learns a hard lesson. Mel struggles with her bedside manner, and Whitaker falls victim to a psych patient known as the Kraken.
We meet the Kraken. Before we dive into our thoughts on the episode, we'd like to give a giant welcome to our special guest, Wendy. Yay!
Wendy, yay!
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad you prodded me to do this because I love the show. I really do.
Yeah, I wasn't giving up. For those who don't know, Wendy works in the medical profession, and I've been, as you heard, bugging her to come on and give us some insight on the show from an actual medical caregiver. And so, Wendy, tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is you do, and how you got into the podcasting world.
Thank you. I'm a nurse. I've been in geriatrics most of my career. I have worked for a large nonprofit hospice in Maryland for the last 11 years. And I got into podcasting about the same time when I took a more administrative job. And I found myself at a loss of the silence that working at a desk is after being a part of a busy unit for such a long time. And I was still on the unit, but I was spending a decent amount of time sitting at my desk. And so I was looking for something to fill that silence, started randomly listening to podcasts. And one of the very first podcasts I listened to was the Walking Dead cast. Became a super fan when Jason started the Patreon group. I joined it. I was in that first group of people. I think it started in the fall and I joined it in December. And it's just been such a whirlwind of wonderfulness that podcasting
it's great, isn't it?
has brought to my life. I started out just guest hosting here and there, and now I'm the permanent host on Yellow Jackets, on House of the Dragon, and on Handmaid's Tale. And I also started my own podcast with 2 lifelong friends and coworkers, and it's called Seniors and the People Who Love Them, and it's all about topics related to aging and seniors. And it's really a passion project. I don't think we're getting tons of downloads, because it's not really what people are generally looking for entertainment. But we've had enough feedback and some amazing guest hosts on there that it's made it all really worthwhile to us, and we've really enjoyed that.
That's cool. I haven't heard your senior podcast, but I'll definitely check that out.
Mhm.
But I can tell you guys, if you are fans of the shows Wendy just listed, these y'all are amazing. I found Jason, The Walking Dead, just when I realized there were podcasts about TV shows.
Yep.
And then through that, I found Penny and Kara with the Buffy, and then it just kept going. And then I just this past year binged your entire Handmaid's Tale
Oh, wow.
coverage, and my mind was blown. I think I messaged Jason and was like, "Holy cow, y'all are incredible!"
It's such a deep show. Like it really is. Yeah.
Really scary with today's
It's
current
probably the
climate.
thing that I've felt the best doing. And also it's super heavy and I can't even imagine what it's going to be like this year.
Ooh.
I will just say, like we've all said, the gloves are off. Like we are bringing it.
Oh, good.
Because I think we've tried to be careful in the past to like not alienate anybody and not talk about politics too much, but it's happening this year.
Yeah, we speak our mind here too. So
Yeah.
Well, we are very glad to have you and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this episode. So to kind of dive into the episode, we usually just give our initial first thoughts. I think a lot of people probably aren't going to like this episode, but it's my favorite of the season thus far. It was moved at a much slower pace, but I appreciated that because we got more time for character building, which we've just been getting tiny little glimpses. But this episode, I feel like we got a lot more on the caregiver side, and we got two very powerful and emotional endings on two of the biggest stories that they've had thus far. I give this 4.5 cracking peens out of 5. What did you think, Wendy?
I really liked it. I really liked the format that they're using. It surprised me. Even though I saw like the first episode was 7 a.m. and the second episode was 8 a.m., I'm like, are they really doing that for the whole thing? But yes, they are.
They really are.
Yeah, and it's different and I think it's ballsy. And I really like it. So it almost doesn't even feel like episodes. It just feels like one big story that's being told. I'm really digging that. And how many episodes are slated for this season?
15. It's a 15-hour shift.
So that's really just interesting how that all goes. But I really liked it. I think the arc of the elderly gentleman at the end of life, I was very invested in from the beginning. Like that's what sings to me with the work that I do. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me was that we finally got a little bit more of Robbie's memories of the early days of COVID. And we saw a little snippet in, I think, the first episode, and we saw a little bit more in this episode. And I'm really thinking that we might get a whole episode on that as a flashback, but I'm not sure. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Mandy?
Well, Wendy, I have to tell you that your specialty could not be more in my wheelhouse. It's funny. This episode, I think I'll have a lot of listening to do as opposed to running my mouth as much as I normally do because I'm so interested in what you do and what your perspectives are of this. And I've never worked in the medical profession, but my entire life, I've had an affinity for older people. When I was a little girl, my house was crowded. There were tons of people, tons of kids, and attention was short all around. And I've always loved attention. So I made friends with all of the older people that were in my neighborhood. So I had like a little routine every day or route almost where I would go and stop and visit my adopted grandparent. And just from then, I used to volunteer. I was very close to my grandmother and my great grandmother. I love history. And so I've just always enjoyed spending time talking to people who had lived a life and hearing about what they have done and what their perspectives are on things and what they've learned. And they're just generally speaking, even the main ones, because we're all still people, as you know, and as we get older, some old people are just nasty old people too. But even those I generally enjoy because they just have a perspective and a wealth of knowledge. And I volunteered in nursing homes before my kids were born. And I have a lot of ideas and thoughts about how people treat the elderly in this society. society. Like I always told my family, if I ever won the lottery, my dream would be to create a nursing home that was an actual home where people could, one of the things that bothered me when I used to volunteer with the nursing home is they wouldn't let me bring in certain prizes and things because they just didn't want the clutter. And here they are taking like every bit of these people's social security, and they're not allowed to have, a couple of trinkets that make them feel more comfortable in their home. Anyway, I could go on about this forever, but I think that the thing that I loved the most about this episode is they did have that very surprising tie to Mr. Rogers, and that we did get to slow down and really spend some time going through the thought process and the grieving and the letting go that the couple, or not the couple, the brother and sister were doing with their dad. And I really, really appreciated how well written and beautiful that was. And I actually learned some things. So anyway, mostly I'm just really excited to hear about Wendy's perspective about all of this.
No, I think you're right. And I think those medical arcs aren't as exciting as cracking open the rib spreader and doing all those other things. So those end of life arcs aren't as medically exciting, but I think it's things that really need to be shown on TV, so that it becomes a part of what we talk about.
Right. And before I started that whole ramble that I tend to get on, linear thought is not my friend. What I was going to say is I don't watch a great deal of television. I probably would never have watched, I know I never would have watched this, except that this was the choice that we were going to do for this podcast. And that stuff, the intubations, all of that, that's the stuff that I have to, Becky, don't think I wasn't cussing you during the roach scene. I'm not getting deep into it just to tell you, except
that one got me too.
I was very mad at you when that roach came climbing out of that guy's ear. But I genuinely loved this episode because, like you said, Wendy, one of the things I think we were talking before we got started here on how far we want to go down the rabbit hole into politics. Wendy is a very sweet, you can tell she's a very thoughtful person, and she wanted to establish what the boundaries were. So she asked, do we cuss and do we get into politics? And that's pretty much what we do the entire episode for the most part. So you're safe. But one of the things I think that has gotten us to where we are in this society is we are selfish, and the vulnerable in this society are so disposable. And a lot of it has to do with greed. And I think this inability to face the fact that your life is going to end, and what do you want your life to have been about at that final moment. One of the things I was trying to get to when I was talking about volunteering in the nursing homes is that I've observed there are a lot of people that don't get visitors in nursing homes. And what I didn't realize until I volunteered in them is that a lot of that is about fear. It's because there are so many people that don't want to face their own mortality. Some of it is that it's just very hard to watch people that you love and authority figures, especially parents, struggle there at the end. But a lot of it too is that you have to face the fact that this too, if you're lucky enough to live to an old age, this very well could be you. And that is really hard for most people to accept. We go through life as a society, we tend to want to live very much in the moment, and it's very me, 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 me. And the hard things to look at, like mortality, taking care of someone even though it doesn't benefit you, like protecting people who are vulnerable, like making healthcare a human right. Especially as Americans, we just want to hide all of that. We want to live in this shiny new now where, we don't have to think about the end of things or the hard stuff. And I love that they took some time to really examine what it's like to have to let go of someone and face your fears about mortality and your regrets for what you could have done and might have done and should have done, and to show someone who maybe didn't have a perfect relationship with their parent really showing up for them at the end.
I think this episode, and one thing that I really enjoy, and Mandy and I have discussed about this show, is that they bring real world situations into the episode, but they do it in a way that feels natural. I credit Noah Wiley a bunch for the way he wrote this episode, particularly this moment with these siblings. And that's the first point that I have. The focus continues on the two major storylines with the siblings dealing with their dying father, and then the young man who OD'd. But what I really thought was neat with the way they did it is they move him into the pediatric room. And then, like you were saying, Wendy, we find out through flashbacks that that was the room that Dr.
Right.
Robbie's mentor died in. And the way Dr. Robbie helped the siblings bring forth information on their dad. And like you said, Mandy, we learned that he worked on the Mr. Rogers set. But what I appreciated most about this was that I love you, thank you, forgive me, I forgive you, because I think about my relationship with my father. We didn't have a great relationship growing up. We are in a very good place now, but it took a long time for us to get there. And I thought it was neat the way they showed the contrast between the siblings, with the brother having all these wonderful moments and memories with his dad. So it was easy for him to say, I love you, thank you, forgive me, I forgive you. But then the sister, the different view she had of her father, and how those words, and that actress is brilliant. Her performance to show her slowly working through that by using those 4 little phrases to come to terms with where she is with her father, to accept that. And then it comes full circle to where it brings the siblings closer together. And the way Dr. Robbie phrases it, you are the reminder of each other's lives now. This is it. I thought that was neat. And I'd really like you to give us your thoughts, having seen that firsthand many times, what you thought about the performance, the story.
I really thought it was great. And I think it encapsulates the journey that you try to get families to go on. Everybody comes from a different starting place. Like me, I'm a hospice nurse. My mom died on hospice. Like, my journey was probably a little easier in many ways because I know about hospice, and I knew what to expect. But even with that, it was really hard. And I think that's the journey that we want to take everybody on. And we get most people through the finish line, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes people die before their loved ones have had the time to progress through all of that. Sometimes there's just not enough time. And sometimes there are barriers that just can't be overcome. We frequently get people that are angry. They're either angry at their loved ones or they're angry at the system. And so that anger stops them from being able to open themselves up to the end of life experience. Sometimes trauma can affect things, but it was very recognizable from real life journeys that people go on. Frequently, even though people have signed up for hospice and have enrolled their loved ones in hospice, frequently they are still not what we call hospice philosophy, meaning they're not accepting of their loved one's incurable disease. They're not accepting that their loved one is going to die. They're still searching for cures and miracles, or they're thinking of what their needs are. Like, a lot of times their need is, well, my loved one is dying and they say it's just a matter of days. I need them to be awake. I need to share that time period with them as long as possible. And so instead of opting for comfort for your loved one, which frequently is sedation, instead of opting for that, they reject that because they want their loved one to be present, not feel like they're not there. And that will frequently come to play, even with people that have made their wishes be known. Even then, family members, unless you have ironclad advance directives, once you are no longer capable of making your medical decisions, somebody's going to be the designated person to make them for you. And they might not make those decisions based on what you wanted. And a lot of times it's not out of ignorance or meanness. Sometimes it's just because they don't know how to make the right decision, or they truly believe that what they're doing is the right thing.
Yeah, and that's where I made a note watching the sister explain or have that conversation with her dad, it brought a lot of clarity as to why it was much more difficult for her to make the choice not to take the tube out and allow him the chance to go. Because Mandy and I talked about it earlier on, how angry we were with her, but this just kind of I still don't think it was the right decision for her to override what her dad's wishes were, but this gave a lot of clarity to that. And I can only imagine what it's like to see that firsthand.
She wasn't ready.
And now we understand why.
I see this all the time, and it's so hard, where I see people that they want to make their family members a DNR. They want their family member to be as comfortable as possible, but they aren't comfortable with being the person that decides that. And so they decide the opposite. And also, they're not comfortable with other family members confronting their decision that they made. I see that all the time. And I've had people say, like, well, can't you just make the decision? And like, no, I can't. I'm sorry. But like, we have an excellent team of physicians and nurses at the hospital, because the hospice I work at has a very large inpatient hospice where we only have 24 beds, but we get ×2 of that admissions a week. So that gives you an idea of the length of stay. And so like, this is what they do 24/7, and they're so good at it. Like, the doctors are so good at having these conversations with people. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's semi-successful, and sometimes it isn't. And I think we've gotten really good at kind of accepting that you do the best you can, you give them everything you have, but then it's up to them. And we just had a patient the other day that family was there for a couple days. Their loved one is going to die, and they are going to die this week. There is no questions about it, but they opted to Narcan and send them out to the hospital. And we just have to roll, we just got to move on to the next person. We do everything we can, and then we roll on to the next person. And maybe that person will come back, and maybe they won't. They'll probably die at the hospital. That's usually what happens in those circumstances. Yeah, I'm so excited to see it on a major television show.
Wendy, I have a question. When you were saying earlier that sometimes the people that you're dealing with are very angry, so they don't get the full experience. Were you referencing the dying person or family members, or both?
It's usually the family members.
Yeah.
It's usually the patients. Not always, but usually the patients are more accepting of things. It's harder for the loved ones. It really is.
I've been through personally in my family 2 different hospice experiences. I have to me, you are like a rock star. I just can't believe that there are people that do what you guys do, because as passionately as I feel about it, because that's kind of what I was talking about. I became less angry at and judgmental of people who ignored the elderly after my time volunteering at the nursing home, because I think for the most part, they aren't doing it out of that they just choose to not. I think it's just very scary. I think it's very scary to confront your own mortality, and watching someone that you love die, and especially die slowly. It's a really, really psychologically difficult thing to do. But like with my grandmother, she refused to talk about end of life care at all, period. And she was slowly dying it was very hard. I was in my mid-20s. She died 2 weeks before I got married when I was 25. And I was very, very close to my grandmother. And that's part of where I got like my strong feelings about people abandoning, because I saw my own family members do that. Once my grandparents got older, most of my cousins and siblings didn't stay close to them the way that I did. But I got really mad at my grandmother, because it felt like the last few years of her life, she was making a lot of choices that were inevitably going to lead to her dying. And I was shocked when she was finally at that point, how not ready she was for it. And that's why I was asking, because my grandmother was not. And then this past year, my aunt, lung cancer, just a chain smoker for 30 something years, did not take care of herself, didn't exercise, didn't eat. She was slowly dying. She died of lung cancer. And it was the same thing. She was not ready, even up until the very last week of her life. The last time I saw her, she was still in disbelief that this was happening to her. And that surprised me. That really surprised me. And my grandmother's hospice experience was much shorter. They sent her home from the hospital. The doctor said, it could be today. day, could be 3 weeks. And fortunately, it was only about 24 hours. And one of the last things I heard her coherently say was, "I'm ready," which was a huge blessing. But my aunt, it was different. Like I don't think she ever got to the point where she truly accepted that this was happening to her. We had to really work on her to get hospice care. And she was still kind of pissy to them. I won't go into the whole detail of we found her on the floor screaming, and she never stopped being melodramatic up to the end. That's one of the things I loved about her. But her hospice worker was just an angel. I mean, I was frustrated and mad at her and getting really annoyed with the way that she was acting. And her nurse was like, "She's fine. It's what she's going through. We see it," because I'm embarrassed. I was upset for her that she was being so nasty. And the nurse was just like, no.
My mom was a firecracker, let me tell you.
Yeah. And I'm sure even being in the industry, you probably felt a personal.
Oh, yeah. She was sitting in my hospital one time and just giving everybody a hard way to go.
Yeah.
And at one point, the nurse walked away and she only made it like a foot away from my mom. And then my mom goes, "God, I hope she knows what she's doing." I was like, "Mom, I work here." And she was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right." And like, there was just no change in her, but I think like people know that you're a good person, and a lot of people understandably react out of discomfort and fear and anxiety. And I think, there's lines that are crossed where it stops becoming that and it's almost always family members, not patients, where it starts becoming like really concerning. But usually we just see people being real.
Yeah. I will tell you, just this is maybe funny to you, just very briefly. My aunt, again, smoked 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day, did not get out of her house, didn't exercise, and she loved her cigarettes. And when we finally got her to go into the hospital for a brief period of time, a couple of months before, this is where they started talking to her about trying to go. She lived out in the middle of the boonies by herself. And when I say the boonies, I mean the boonies in West Tennessee. And this house that probably should have been condemned. But they got her in the hospital and they had talked her into, she was going to go into a long-term care facility. But at the last minute, they sent her home. So we're having to just kind of depend on her sons to tell us what's going on. If they say, "Oh, she just got home." And she told us that they just at the last minute said there wasn't room. Come to find out, she found out that they would not let her smoke. So she called the hospital from her room and told them that she was going to call the news and have the news come out there and say that they were holding her hostage if they didn't let her go home.
Yep, I've seen that before.
Yeah. Bless her.
Anything else anybody want to add on the siblings and the passing of the dad?
I want to mention is that some of the acting choices that you brought up earlier that the woman that played the daughter had made, she was amazing. She really should win some kind of award for that. But also Mackenzie Aston was amazing too. And one of the things I really noticed for whatever reason was when they asked if they were religious and they both made this eye contact with each other and kind of chuckled and they said, "Oh, no, God." And it just felt like they were real siblings in that moment. You could hear like 1,000 lectures that they probably had from their father over the years about being moral without being religious. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was like, there was so much in the first few episodes of them being kind of combative to each other, or at least got this impression of how they were very, very different. But one of the things I thought was beautiful in this is through the dying process and her really buying into it at the end, is that you started to see more of how they were alike and that they were a family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think so often women have to be like the family advocates. So they're used to being like that voice. And I think she was being that voice.
She was trying very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely feel myself in her because I feel like my dad and my husband are quite soft-spoken and, don't want to put anybody out. And I'm usually the person that they're like, go get him, Wendy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've listened to the past episodes of the podcast, but that's one of the things that has bothered me a little bit about the show is that I feel like they make women the heavies a lot.
I think it's real, though.
Well, I think it's real too, but I don't think it's a very sympathetic portrayal of why women are the way that they are. Just in my family, I am that person too. Like they joke and most of the women in my family have pretty big mouths, but they're not always, especially in medical situations. Most of my family members, whenever there is a medical crisis, they're not great about getting the right information from their doctors and understanding what's going on and advocating for themselves. And of course, as we get older and our older relatives and we become like that, the caretaking generation. I've had several situations with older family members where they've got cancer or something very serious going on. And you ask questions about, well, what's the next step? I don't really know. And so they joke now about like, if I'm in the room and the doctor's in there, I'm going to politely but firmly nail them down on some specifics. So I've become kind of like, it's a little running joke that I don't want to use the term. I was going to say like the hospital Nazi, but God knows we don't want to throw that term around lightly anymore.
No.
So the hospital general is what we'll just say it. And it's not from a place of hate. I honestly don't think any of the doctors that I've ever spoken to have minded it. It's because it is important. Right. It is important for someone to really nail down what's going on when you have very serious healthcare things going on. And this one, I think they did a great job of redeeming. I think, Wendy, you're right. Yes. Like one of the things I loved about this is that they showed the complexity of why she was, but there were several other little episodes or little things that have gone on in the last few episodes where you had women that they're the shrill ones and they're the ones that are more strident. And I think you're right. I think we are often the ones that have to be that, but it's not because we're just bitchy. It's because we're the caretakers.
Right. And like people often come to me with problems they're having with the healthcare system, and the healthcare system is in trouble. Like I'm not the person that's like, oh, nurses never do anything wrong or hospitals never do anything wrong. I know what's happening. But I always tell people, like, firmly but politely insist on having your concerns addressed. Like, don't come out the bat screaming because you're just going to get security.
You're going to get ignored.
Right. Right. But firmly, politely, and that's what I try to do. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. But, someone should be listening to your concerns. If somebody is not, that's a problem.
Right.
And I do believe, like, it's true. The squeaky wheel gets it, but I think you have to be polite and you have to have your mind opened a little bit.
Right.
If you're closed your mind and you think, if you walk into the ER, and this is what's happening today.
You think
you
know
walk in
everything.
The ER and you think doctors are the enemy. It's not going to go well. Like you have to, and I have doctors where they're like, well, you should do this. And I'm like, no, I don't think I should do that. I'm the worst patient in the world, but like, it has to be a dialogue. And
right.
If you're walking in with this attitude that they don't know what they're doing, then,
right. Like that one guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what popped into my head when you said that. And I think that, my mom was an RN. She's retired now, but she spent the majority of her career working at the VA. And she has a lot of stories similar to what you've dealt with and just discussed with patients. I was telling Mandy last week that, there were several people. My mom, we grew up in a very small town, and I'm biracial. Mom is Black. And, people did not want her care because of that. On the opposite end of the spectrum, my mom just spent some time in the emergency room. She actually had a doctor, her primary care physician. For years, she's like, he doesn't listen to me. Mom's smart. She knows a lot about the medical field, medicines, what's good, what's not. And her doctor just doesn't listen to her. And then this emergency room doctor, she's like, it's the first time that I felt heard when discussing my medical issues. And that is a problem in the medical field right now. And it's a big problem for women, and it's a very big problem for women of color.
Yep.
So I agree with you that it is a two-way street, and she is a difficult patient. They often say that, doctors and nurses are the worst kind of patients, but I think we've got a long way to go, and I'm not optimistic with our current administration that these problems are going to be handled appropriately. But if I can let that segue into a moment where I think they got it right, and I think that was absolutely beautiful, is the transgender woman Tasha, played by Eve Everett Irving. I've read up on her.
She's beautiful.
Amazing. Again, talking about what we were talking about earlier, how this show brings real world people and situations into a show, but they don't do it in a way that's like an after school special.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought having her come in and be treated like every other patient with respect and dignity, and Dr. McKay and Javati did such a great job, taking care of her and talking with her. And then just not a big production, but Javati saying, "Oh, by the way, I fixed you had some."
She was misgendered.
Yeah. And she's like, "I fixed it, so you shouldn't have a problem anymore." And the woman looks at her just like, "Thank you."
She just got some common courtesy and decency, and them treating her like anybody else and treating her the way she wanted to be treated. And obviously that's not how she's treated most places she goes.
Right.
So it was unique enough that she was touched and wanted to talk about it.
What I took from that, and maybe I'm wrong because I think it was left pretty ambiguous, but I thought it was fairly obvious that she very likely had attempted suicide, and that was what the injury was from. And so maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but the way that I took that entire storyline was that, particularly if you take into consideration Javati's personality up to this point, she's very naive, she's very sheltered. There's been several moments where she's had to deal with people outside of her sphere, like the kid that took the Xanax and a couple of others, and the doctor that she's working with that she knows that she has a ankle monitor on, and she's been a bit judgmental. So I felt like that was a really great choice to have her be that one, because throughout that entire interaction, Becky, I apologize, what's the other doctor's name? The older doctor?
Dr. McKay.
Dr. McKay. Dr. McKay kind of led that interaction, and you could tell that she was deliberately doing that. And the woman almost exclusively spoke to Dr. McKay, because it was almost like you could tell that she, from experience, has learned who isn't looking at her. Javati kind of had this deer in the headlights look the entire time they were interacting, and McKay was treating her like a human person with dignity and listening to her story and talking to her. And I don't know if you guys got the same thing that I did, that the injury was very likely an attempt. But in my mind, it was almost as if that moment where Javati acknowledged she had been misgendered was like hope.
When I first saw the way the cut was on her hand, I thought it was a suicide attempt, but I do not believe that's what it was. And I hope that was not their intention. Story of the wine and, the crap. I don't think I thought for a second it was suicide, but I immediately, once they started talking, I felt very differently about it. And I didn't see Javati as a deer in headlights because she was dealing with a transgender person. I saw her more as a deer in headlights because she was the one, she's skittish about blood. We know she's not comfortable in situations like that. So yeah, she was a little deer in headlights, but that was because she had to clean this wound. She had to stitch this wound. And I think the conversation that Dr. McKay and Tasha had was as much for Javati to help her feel comfortable too, to be able to do what she was doing.
I agree with that.
And I think that her doing that wasn't an aha moment for Javati, not this time. I think it was just her doing what she felt was, I just felt like it was natural. I don't feel like it was, I don't feel like that was the lesson for Javati. I feel like it was more.
I don't think it was a lesson for Javati. Let me clarify. I don't mean that I think that she just sat there and had this moment where she's like, aha, transgender people are human. I think that she is very naive. I think she's very inexperienced in a lot of ways. So I think I got the impression that it was unusual for her, not necessarily that it was bad or that she was judging this woman, but I felt like McKay was very much guiding the interaction because she had seen a couple of moments already where Javati did say or do the wrong thing unintentionally from naivety. And I got the impression that, when you are around people that you can feel are judging you, whether it's because of the way you're dressed or your race or or anything, sometimes in this world, I will do this. I will just tune you out. I will just talk to someone else and tune you out. And so I got the impression, and again, I may just be reading too much into it. I still think, though, that it probably was, and I think they left it ambiguous, but I got the impression that it was just kind of exhausting for her to have somebody that naive and kind of deer in the headlights. And maybe she's defensive about it. Not necessarily, she didn't know whether Javati was being that way from bigotry or naivety or whatever. But I think she very much was focused on McKay because McKay was treating her like any other human being and it wasn't as exhausting to deal with her. And I think you're right. I think the patter was for both of them. And that's why I said, it felt like she was doing that thing I do when I get around a bigot, where if I have to interact with them or somebody that I suspect might be a bigot, I just kind of act like they're not there. And I just felt like when she did at the end say, I noticed this, that was the first time that she let her guard down a little bit with Javati. And I feel like that gave her, whether or not it was an attempt or it was just an accident, I feel like that gave her some hope that she was maybe not sure whether this girl was a bigot or what was going on with her. And having that validation that she did see her as who she is gave her some hope leaving that hospital.
No, I agree with that part. With the end result of it giving her hope, but I did not see, and I'm as critical of these interns as one can be, but I did not, because Javati talked about how she wasn't old enough to drink legally, and the patient was made a little joke. I didn't see it. Wendy, what do you think? How did you?
Javati seems, so first of all, she's young.
She's
very.
I mean, I don't think we know how old she is, right? But
20, I think.
She's not old enough to drink, so I think she's like 20.
I think they said 20 once, but I could be making that up.
Typical med students, a typical doctor starting their residency is 25 to 30 these days because it's hard to get into medical school. You often have to do gap year programs or master's degree programs, bridge programs. So it's really not unusual to be sitting around for 3 and 4 years trying to get into med school. So your typical person in residency is 25 to 30 and she's 20. So she's got a lot to prove. She seems like she's probably always been kind of outside of her peer group because of obviously advanced academics. And I didn't think she was being, I think she was being her awkward little self.
Right.
Yeah.
And also being a brown person, she can probably really identify with the way it is to be treated as an other. And that's what I thought. I've really liked the character, and all these characters are really interesting, and there's a lot of them, and I just can't wait to see where they go with some of we just get little snippets each episode.
Sometimes they're giving us red herrings to lead us down one conclusion that are going to end up being completely different.
Yes.
If I can pause really quick, take us away from the show and say to the entire transgender community, what's happening right now, pardon my French, is bullshit. And I, on behalf of this entire country, am sorry for all of us that what's happening in this country today. But please know you are human. You are perfect as you are. We love you. We support you. And anyone else who feels differently can go fuck themselves. So I just wanted to say that.
There's so much to say right now, and it's a really hard time. And I think what we could do as individuals is treat those people with kindness and compassion and model behavior that we would love others to do. And I think that's the most important thing we can do. I'm very proud of the way most of my coworkers and colleagues and my organization treats minorities and persons of color and the LGBTQ family. And I want us, that's what makes it worthwhile to me. And I'm just going to keep doing the little things that I can do that hopefully make a little difference. And if we all did that, what a great world it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's hard right now.
I'm angry.
I
I'm just
know.
so angry, and I haven't quite
Yeah,
figured out how to channel all of that anger and rage. And when I saw this story, it just made me stop
very
and think about
timely.
what's, yeah, very. And I again,
Just
bravo
somebody
Noah
who's just
Wiley
trying to live
for,
their life.
Just trying to
yeah,
live.
Just trying to go and get what we all take for granted.
yeah. So sorry about that.
It's very hard for me to take this whole we're protecting women thing seriously. It enrages me. As somebody who was molested more than once in childhood by different people, as someone who has been physically assaulted by men, never, every single time it was a man. It was a couple of times it was a gay man, but most of the time, especially the molestation, it was cisgender white men. I don't know of anyone who has ever been assaulted by a trans person. I'm sure it happens. Trans people can be shitheads just like anybody else, but I don't know of anyone who's ever had that problem. However, I would guess, I've heard a statistic that it's 1 in 3 women that have been physically assaulted in their life. I think that's bullshit. I think it's far more like, at least in my experience, 1 in 3 that haven't. And the vast majority of the time, it is a man who is in your circle who is doing the assaulting. So until these sons of bitches want to do something about that among their brethren, I don't want to hear shit about trans women in a bathroom or trans men for that. It's so much bullshit.
I mean, people are people. There are good people and there are bad people. There
Right.
are good people who are not U.S. citizens and there are bad people who are not
Right.
U.S. citizens. There are good people who are U.S. citizens and there are bad people who are U.S. citizens.
Right.
It's people are people. There are good and bad. Being a certain sexuality or a certain gender identity or a certain citizenship doesn't change anything. They
No.
want you to believe that it does, that it's us. We are the best. We are the,
Right.
and by we I mean,
cisgender and generally speaking, white people.
U.S.
When you
citizens.
look at the terrorism that's happened in this country,
Right.
what is the majority of it? It's white males.
Even when it's not white males.
Gun violence.
Yeah, this week, Wendy, I don't know if you saw on the news, right down the road from my house where one of my associates teaches, we had a kid that went in and murdered a little girl. He had a whole plan to take out a whole bunch of other people. It was a black kid who has somehow been radicalized into white supremacy.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, it's so pervasive in our society. And that's why I say it pisses me off because, yes, you are right. You can be any gender, anywhere on the spectrum, the sexuality spectrum, any of that, and be a dickhead or be a good human being. But if you just look at the numbers, because these people are all about logic, quote unquote, winky fingers logic, look at the numbers. There is no data to support their bullshit theory that it is trans people in bathrooms that are the ones that you need to be worried about harming your children. It is your father, it is your uncle, it is the creepy neighbor next door, it's your scout leader. It's the people that they know that are overwhelmingly the ones that are going to be a danger to women and children. So why don't they care about that? And that's rhetorical. We all know why they don't care. But that particular bigotry just really chaps my nuts, so to speak. There's no logic to it. Anybody that believes that transgender people are a real threat as a whole in this country are just looking for reasons to be bigot. That's it. It icks you out, and you have found something that you can run with that makes you a socially accepted bigot in this day and age.
And I was curious. I thought, like you, I thought that her injury was a little suspicious, but I felt like her responses and what they saw clinically must have indicated to them that it wasn't self-inflicted, or else they would have done other things. They would have questioned her. They would have given her some resources. They would have done something different. So I felt like she had satisfied their, criteria. But also, I mean, there's a reason, I always always think like the directors, there's a reason why the injury was where it was. There's a reason why they wanted us to think what we thought.
Right.
And I'm curious if we'll see her again.
Yeah, I felt like it was definitely ambiguous. I don't necessarily know that we know one way or the other. And I do feel like McKay was trying to suss that out while she was talking to her. I fell on the end of she was clearly not in crisis at that moment and had brought herself to get care. And so I felt like, again, I could have been reading too much into it, but I felt like McKay had erred on the side of it might be, but I'm going to choose to take her at her word right now because I've spoken with her. We've worked this out. She is lucid. She's come to get care. So I'm going to choose to believe her.
I've said it several times in our previous podcast that everything you see, you're seeing for a reason.
Yeah.
I had thought about her coming back into the storyline, but perhaps.
Right. It could just have been a brief snippet that had its purpose. It could be, but I'm curious to see if we'll see her again.
Yeah.
You know?
Me too.
And I feel that way with a lot of the different patient arcs. Like, I'm like, where are you going with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it keeps you hanging on, and it makes you want to watch the next episode. So
yeah,
it does.
Well done.
So the second main storyline in this episode was I think we'll still see him in the next episode because I feel like the show will respect and give him the same finality that they gave Mr. Spencer. But I really liked that it wasn't so much his story this time, but the young lady, Jenna, who took the same medicine he did, but she lived. There were several things that happened in this section that I thought was important, but the most important thing was this young woman. I still hate that the dad went off on her the way that he did. And I think he really could have apologized to her when she apologized to him. But I think it was really mature and really special for her to go seek him out when she saw him and say, you know, he was always nice and here's what happened and here's, you know, how he ended up the way that he did. And I'm sorry. And I hope that, you know, everything works out. I think that gave the look on the dad's face was almost relief, that realizing that his son isn't out there dealing giving fentanyl pills to kids. He just got sucked in just like the rest of them
it's
did.
Unfortunately just a tragic accident. And I mean, I can't imagine, like, I have 2 children, and if something happened like that to them, I'm sure I would be out of my brain. So, you know, she gave him her number, and I hope they connect, you know?
Yeah.
I think they will later. I think he was I'm with you, Becky. Like, it would have been more satisfying if he had given her a hug or said it's okay or something. But I think it's probably more realistic that was about as capable of compassion, and that I think he's using. I would be using every single bit of my sanity to just stay upright. And sometimes your anger is what sustains you, you know?
And I think that's also the show trying to do some good, because I think raising the awareness of taking a pill that you don't really know where it came from, what's in it, what it is really dangerous. And this is in a day and age where, you know, kids are passing a lot of things around, and it's not just in college, it's in high school and middle school and elementary school these days. Yeah, so I think it's good for parents and kids to be, I say kids, but I know they're in college, to be aware.
They're still kids.
Anybody under 30 is a kid to me these days.
I mean, my daughter's 32, so I might include that.
Yeah.
She'll always be your kid.
Right. But yeah, I think, like, I love that they're trying to educate. It's so needed, and this is a great way to do that.
Yeah, I think they do a good job without being preachy. I think that's what Becky was getting at earlier, that they introduce heavy topics and timely topics, but I think do a good job of showing the human nuance. No one's really a cartoon villain. No one's a saint.
Well, that brings me to Trinity.
Speaking of cartoon villains.
That whole interaction with her and Dr. Mohan was very interesting to me. And I'm curious, Wendy, if you've ever dealt, I don't know in your line of work, if you deal with residents and interns and situations like that. But the first thing that struck me was how cool Dr. Mohan was to tell this young lady, do you know how lucky you are? And that allowed Jenna to really start, her annoying friend on the phone. She's realizing what's important, and that's it. Oh my God, I almost died, but I did not. And I found Trinity's response to her interesting because Mandy, as soon as she said, focus on the positive things, I thought about so many conversations that you and I have. Mandy and I are each other's support humans, that I have said that to you or you said that to me. And I never really looked at it. I felt like it was, I understood Trinity. Write it down. I may never say it again. I understood what she was trying to do there. And I'm glad that it showed that she does have some level of empathy in her. Was it the right thing? Absolutely not. But I understand why she did what she did, because that's what we try to do when people are in crisis, is to tell them it's not all bad. Let's look at the good things that you have going on in your life.
Yeah.
I thought Jenna's response was completely appropriate to a girl who just almost died. And I think Trinity needed to hear that. And I think Dr. Mohan's response to her, I think Trinity needed to hear that. Yeah. And I think Trinity heard what she was saying. And I do think she's going to learn from that whole experience. But then she goes and gives more instructions and almost kills a patient
because she jumps ahead.
She's my least favorite character, but she's also one of the most complex and diverse characters. And that young woman is brilliant in the way she plays that. So just what did y'all think about that whole situation?
Yeah, I think that, being a clinical good doctor or nurse is one thing, and learning how to talk to your patients, how to read your patients, how to be compassionate, how to show empathy. Those are all tricky parts that we didn't used to teach doctors how to do that. And I think we're doing a much better job of that. And I think, I don't know how. I'd have to ask my daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law is an ER resident. I'd have to ask her how true to life.
Well, shoot, we need to get her on one day.
I know, and I don't know if podcasting is her thing, but she's fabulous. So I don't know how true to life, like doctors admonishing other doctors for the way they talk to patients. Or I would be curious about that, though.
Aren't they both some type of resident, though?
Well, yeah, but Mohan. Well, see, Trinity is an intern.
Right, which is your first year of residency.
Okay.
Yeah. And Mohan is like I think she's
third year or fourth year,
third or
so
fourth year resident. So
wouldn't that make her some sort of supervisory role?
Is a bit of a,
those senior residents are supposed to teach the new residents. Like currently my daughter-in-law's in her second year of a 3-year residency. So last year was her intern year. Fun fact, they don't really call them interns. They don't. They're all residents,
aren't they?
Right. And like nobody, and I would be curious to see, how she answered these questions too. I've been begging her to watch the show.
Well, get back to us. Tell her to go watch at least
She's a huge Grey's Anatomy fan. So I'm like, you can do this one too.
I feel like
oh yeah, give us 15 hours. You've given Grace 72 years.
That's right.
Come on.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that scene, Becky, because I got a little defensive about her in our last episode. And it's funny, I even talked about her in therapy. By the way, my therapist is watching the show.
Feedback, please.
I'll tell her that. But at any rate, I realized that it's because I don't like Trinity. Like, I'm doing the winky fingers, the air quotes. She's got a lot of growing up to do. She's got a whole lot of growing up to do. I do see a lot of myself in her, especially my younger self. And I think that what they've established through this show so far is that Trinity is, to some degree, she is the way she is because that is how she has survived, by toughening herself up, not accessing her finer emotions very easily. Just immediately when something bad happens, she just starts rolling with, how do I suck it up and move on? You can't live in the past, because if you do, it's going to drag you down. That has served her well probably, I know, like in my life, personally, it served me well because it helped me survive a lot of really shitty things. It also, if you think back to our younger days of when we first met, it made me kind of an asshole a lot of the time. And it wasn't that I intended to be that. It was never my intention. It always came from a place of care or loving, but it probably came across as very hard. And sometimes I really do have a hard time understanding people struggling anymore because I've had to pick my own bootstraps up so often that sometimes I think it makes me come across as very unempathetic. And so that is kind of what I see in this character, is that she has empathy. She is able to be empathetic. We've seen that several times, but she often does not know how to talk to people. And sometimes she lets that very clinical part of her take over in ways that could be really detrimental as a doctor. So I loved what Mohan said to her. I thought that was awesome. I love that she was very, asked her, what's your, how thick is your skin? And when she was like, oh, I'm a rhino, then she took her at her word and she was like, okay, cool. Here's what. And I think Trinity found in that moment that she's not the rhino that she thought she was. It was hard for her to hear that you're not.
It was a learning experience on many levels for her.
Yeah.
Things that I've had to learn over the years is I may have a lot to say, but even if I'm right, if I say it in a way that other people are not going to receive it, if I'm not meeting them where they're at, then I'm not doing anybody any good. In fact, I may be doing harm. And I don't always know what I think I know. And so I thought it was awesome that she told her that. And I thought that was such a great moment, her getting that feedback and receiving it. But then, like you said, Becky, and I do think that being clinical, and I'm curious, I want to hear what Wendy has to say about this afterwards. I don't know if she knows a whole lot about surgeons because I know that that's not necessarily her field, but I've always heard that, surgeons have to be, by and large, most of them are a lot less clinically or a lot less, they come across as a lot less compassionate, but that's part of them having the way their brain has to operate to be able to do the work.
Oh, I don't think it has to be that way.
Well, I don't mean being assholes. I mean, like, I'm not even going to get too far in defending this. I just mean, like, sometimes very scientific people are not incredibly emotional people. And that can really help you, I would imagine, when you are in very, very dicey situations where somebody's jugular is open and you're having to shut off every part of your brain that is not saving that person. And like a lot of us would get squeamish doing those things. They do them. And some of that is due to the fact that they don't have very emotional personalities. But that being said, then there's like 2 scenes later, that old Dr. Garcia, Dr. Groomer, I'm going to start calling her, comes in.
That was gross.
It was so gross. And she was like, it's almost like she is encouraging her to be an ass.
To be this person, because she was ready to tear somebody a new rear end.
She found out it was her girl.
When she saw that. And then she's like, oh. And my favorite part of this entire episode, aside from the Kraken, which is in my chart notes, is the way Noah Wiley leaned back behind Dr. Langdon and looked at that interaction. Chef's kiss, Noah Wiley. That I don't know if y'all noticed it.
No, I did.
And the patient's like, yeah, she likes you.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Somebody needs to put the kibosh on that quickly. That doesn't seem right to me.
No, that is gross. I mean, because again, I was all like, oh, Trinity's learned something. She's going to move forward. And then immediately she goes and does some dumb shit again. And
Trinity's going to Trinity. That's my new thing.
That is good. And then Dr. Groomer comes in and she's just like, oh, it's cool. It happens. Whatever.
We were all interns once.
What is she doing?
I don't know.
Yuck.
But it's weird.
Yeah, I will say, like, they're very interesting. And also trying to figure out, like, who might be romantically linked at some point.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a lot of that, but I'm sure it's coming.
Romantic relationships, you mean?
Yeah.
Again, might be a red herring, but I totally think that Dr. Robbie is Dr. Collins'
baby daddy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what we're supposed to think.
But is it true? I don't know.
It's been very subtle. Also thought that Dr. Langdon might have something going for
Dr. Mohan?
Yes.
See, I still think he's gay.
I don't know. Most of them are very beautiful. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good looking staff.
Mateo, that hair. my gosh.
Ooh.
Speaking of good looking, when are we going to get to the guy that came in with the heart problem this week?
He's in chart notes.
Okay, because he was fine.
Oh, yeah.
Wait. Oh, the construction guy?
Yes.
With the team he was leading with the festival.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't have if you want to.
That's it. That's really my only note.
And I feel like Dr. Whitaker is like the Noah Wiley of ER.
Oh my God, he's
Yeah.
John Carter.
Yes.
He is John.
Yes.
He is baby
John
Carter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's my next point
Yes.
is, yay, we finally get to meet the Kraken.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I cannot believe they showed a real penis.
Oh,
on
yeah.
TV.
Oh, it's HBO. And they say fuck all the time.
I wonder if that was real.
I don't think that happens in the ER, but I'm going to ask my daughter-in-law because
People cussing?
I don't think so.
Hanging on you.
I'm sure some people do. Like, I have my select people at work that I feel comfortable enough letting the F-bomb go, but it's not many.
Oh, wait. I missed something. There was an F-bomb?
Oh, yeah.
She's talking about the staff just casually cursing in the
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. In front of patients, too. I don't think that happens that
It is
much.
Pittsburgh.
I mean, this is Baltimore. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're from a big northern.
Yeah.
Down here in the South, I just always think of it more in the, not that we don't all have potty mouths, a lot of us do in private life, but there's this big expectation of being reserved in public or being polite, and especially around older generations. So I guess I just was thinking that maybe up north it's more common.
I'm going to have a list of questions for my daughter-in-law to give her.
I can't wait. And please either come back on with
Yeah.
that. You are welcome anytime, by the way, even when we move on to whatever shows we're doing next. But yeah, poor Whitaker. I have a feeling he's not going to have any credits left on his Scrubs card.
That's so funny. That's such a.
Because I think there was that little girl the young woman that was like, "Can I help you get Scrubs?" Watch out. I saw some chemistry there on her part. I think he's so naive and oblivious. He didn't even recognize it that she was like, "Hey, what's up?"
Yeah, speaking of deer in a headlight.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that. So Wendy, are there scrub vending machines?
Yes.
So that is true.
Yes.
That was
We
my burning
used them
question.
during COVID.
Do you have to pay for them?
I mean, I'm sure some hospitals do, but we didn't charge people for that. Especially during COVID, it became a thing.
You just have to put your old ones in there.
I mean, we actually had a service where they came in and filled up the scrubs, and then they took the dirty scrubs and washed them. And
Did you have to put your old ones in to get new ones out?
no.
Okay.
But I absolutely believe that's a thing in some hospitals.
Will you ask your daughter-in-law?
Yes, I will. She has her own scrubs. Every place is different. People usually want their own stuff.
Yeah, Mom always had countless closet full of scrubs.
Mhm.
But I know my dad, my dad had a practice, he was a gastroenterologist, also retired. He didn't wear scrubs very much, but when he was at the hospital, he always wore hospital scrubs.
Mhm. Some departments require that you wear their own scrubs. I don't think most of them give you the option of taking them home and washing them yourselves because, detergents and allergies and every other thing.
Yeah.
But I remember during COVID, it was a big thing because people didn't want to take their stuff home.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was thinking back when I saw him in his him get peed on. I was thinking about during COVID when medical professionals would have to come home, completely disrobe and shower before they could even enter the main part of the living area because it was
a
such
really scary
worry.
time. Like, I remember thinking to myself, like, should I go to work? Am I putting my family at risk? You didn't know what to do. You didn't know what the right thing was. You didn't know what was going to happen. And it was really scary.
Question for you, Wendy, that I have noticed that, especially during COVID, several of my nurse acquaintances were COVID deniers. Why do you think that is? There were so many nurses specifically. Like, one of the things we talked about that I think was kind of realistic, except for the fact that I don't think any hospital allows you to smoke on the grounds anymore.
Most of them don't.
Right, but understand being a smoker. Like, up until they banned it here at our hospitals, even when my kids were born, you would see nurses standing outside.
Healthcare workers
smoking.
are very heavy smokers in general.
Right.
Like, it shocked me when I first got into healthcare how much that was true.
Well, and it kind of makes sense because you do know that I do understand that it is a very, very stressful.
Yeah.
And all of us have our vices. But the COVID things, that really, really threw me. And maybe it was predominantly here in the South. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's just people that there's something happening in this country right now where people will see the sky in front of their face and say that it's not there.
How do you think that they justify that with their medical knowledge? That's the part that I don't understand.
They just believe what they believe. I still see this happening. Now I have somebody who's at a relatively high level at my work, and she just said the other day on a meeting that masks don't work. And I've also caught her admonishing people for getting vaccines. And it just like if you say it in front of me, you're getting a response. And I give her the response because I can't stop myself right now. But I just don't know. And I will say, it is not the majority of people that I know. The majority of people that I know are not this way. They believe in fucking science.
Right.
They believe in clinical studies that, have proven things, but you just have people that no matter what happens, they're going to follow the line.
And see, I get that with most people.
And I would also say that they probably were not sitting in an ICU or an ER during COVID.
But the way that my brain works is that there are a lot of things that I don't know anything about, but I trust people who are educated in those subjects. And I understand there is a broad spectrum in almost everything that you could ever discuss. So in the medical community, I know there are going to be outliers that are going to, say things like raw milk is safe to drink, things like that. But what I do as just a thinking person is that I look at the vast majority of people who have educated themselves in this subject agree that this is one thing. I can even understand why Joe Schmo down the road who thinks that he is an expert at everything and is actually an expert at nothing can look at a couple of random YouTube videos and suddenly say COVID is somehow both manufactured by the Chinese and also not real. What I can't grasp is how people who have gone through years and years of medical training to become experts in their field can then deny. And because it was a statistically pretty big number, especially again down here in the South where there's a shit ton of ignorance these days. But
well, I think you just answered your question.
But I don't. I can't wrap my head around it.
I know it doesn't make sense, but I don't get it either.
I prepared a little bit about this. I looked up some things because I was inspired by Dr. Robbie's flashbacks that he had, which kind of brought me back to the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 healthcare workers died in the first 6 to 8 weeks of COVID. Ultimately, by May of 2021, over 180,000 healthcare workers died from COVID.
Oh my
personal
gosh.
experiences is that I had coworkers that died. I had coworkers that, unfortunately, the exposure to the disease was brought to their families and had deaths or permanent disabilities. Several people have never returned to work at all since COVID. I remember I had a family, this is in the very first 4 to 6 weeks, I would say. I had a family where the patient was a grandfather that was on our service, and he died, then his wife died, then his son died, then his son's wife died, leaving 2 young girls, teenagers, who had just lost their entire family. And when I read, and I'm a big Facebook person, and I get on Facebook comments and see things. I don't know why I do that to myself. And when I read stuff about, that the pandemic was all faked or that doctors made money off of it, it's so hurtful. It's so hurtful that the people that are sitting in the ER waiting for you to come if you have an emergency, it's so hurtful to them.
And insulting.
And it's created this huge distrust of healthcare workers, and not just distrust, the amount of aggression and physical and emotional and racist violence that we've seen against healthcare workers has extrapolated during COVID. We now have 6-foot sign when you walk into our centers that say this is the behavior that will not be tolerated. And we've done that because people have hit our staff, have cursed at our staff, have thrown things at our staff. The person that's taking care of your dying loved one, your families get into fights, physical fights in our buildings. We had one time where we had 20, 30 family members duking it out in our building. And we had to call the police twice. The first time the police came, they didn't do anything about it. Like, and then the second time they're like, why do you keep calling us? And we're like, because we can't work
What are we
like
supposed to do?
this.
Right. We're doctors and nurses.
Like, other patients and families are frightened. Like, what?
What are you supposed to do? Right.
That's crazy.
And I'm sure this is just the tip of the iceberg, like, of what hospitals are seeing. Where it's just scary times, and I don't know how much more I have in me of all this. Like, if another pandemic comes, I think I'm tapping out
Of healthcare.
Yes, I don't think I can take more, especially under this administration.
Yeah, I guess that's
No.
why it's doubly stunning to me that people who have been through medical training can then perpetrate these types of lies and disinformation and believe in these conspiracy theories. How can you then just you want someone to trust you as an expert in your field? How do you then just justify not believing the vast majority of experts in epidemiology and the doctors and nurses that have to work at the front line that have had these experiences?
Right.
I can't wrap my head around really how anyone does it, but it particularly is strange to me when I see people in the healthcare industry.
I feel like healthcare workers, a larger majority doesn't feel that way, but I definitely see it. It's just like most things, is that most of the people with the boots on the ground don't feel that way, but some of the higher ups that are sitting in their offices do.
I don't get it.
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating, and it's not doing anybody any good. For example, since COVID, the length of stay on hospice has been cut in half. And the reason for that is because people do not trust healthcare. People are sitting in their houses with their terminal illnesses and their chronic conditions, and they are not getting treated.
Just crazy.
And also our healthcare system is just really bad right now. I mean, I blame that as well. Like, I'm a nurse and I'm an administrator, so I know how to navigate the healthcare system. I used to work in insurance. Like, I know all that stuff, and yet I still have a lot of trouble getting healthcare, jumping through all the hurdles that are up there. So I can't imagine what people who don't have anyone to help them or don't have the technology or might be suffering from some beginning dementia. How are they supposed to jump through these fiery hoops? They don't, and then they just get sicker. And then they die.
You make me feel better, though, by the way, for the fact that my healthcare, like, keeping up with when I'm supposed to contact them to let them know that everything is still the same every year, that I don't understand all these bills that are coming in. You make me feel like less of a monkey that wants to beat her head against a wall, because it makes me feel very stupid.
It's really bad. I mean, and it's hard for me to go to the doctor and not be like, really? Come on.
Yeah.
I went to the doctor the other day and somebody was like, are you still on Valium? And I'm like, I don't think I've ever taken Valium in my entire life.
Where did that come from?
Or they still ask me about, like, am I still on Ambien? And I'm like, I was on Ambien in 2011. Like, what's happening? You know, just like things like that really fucking annoy me.
I have a quick question. You can be as general as you want about this. How is your health care? Because one of my best friends is a psychiatric nurse practitioner in Dallas, and I have a couple of nurse friends here in Nashville, and their health care is shitty.
I mean, I'll say, like, my company offers a pretty decent Care First system.
Good.
Which we pay dearly for. Like, I think me and my husband pay like $700 a month for that.
Yeah, crazy.
So I think that's probably better than most, certainly better than an HMO, certainly better than the United Healthcares of the world, much better than any kind of Medicaid, which is bad. You know, like, they usually have so many barriers to care. That's their goal. I mean, we need universal health care. And do I think the United States government in its current situation can handle universal health care? No, I don't.
Yeah, that's the problem.
But that is what we need. I deal with a lot of wealthy clients as well, and they're all going to concierge medicine and paying boatloads of money for everything to be out of pocket.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't blame them for doing it, but we shouldn't need that.
We shouldn't have to. Yeah.
Right.
We shouldn't live in a world.
Right. Where only the rich get good health care.
Yeah.
And that's what we are in.
Yep. All right. Back to the show. The abortion story.
I was curious where that was really going. Yeah.
What did she see on the ultrasound? It looked to me like size would indicate that she's further along than maybe Dr. Abbott said.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah, so it could have been that Dr. Abbott was maybe downgrading her weeks that she was so that she could
yeah.
still get the medical abortion, maybe. But I'm curious to see where that goes because that family did seem a little sketchy.
For a moment, I thought maybe the mom was the one that really needed the medicine and that she was just saying it was her daughter. But then I was like, well, how would that work? That can't.
Not with an ultrasound.
Right, but that's
But
what I thought at
something
first
was
was like that there was
happening,
nothing there on the ultrasound. But then I thought, no,
Yeah.
because they're letting her do the ultrasound, so that can't be it. But yeah, something weird is going on there, and I don't know what. I'm curious about that too.
I'm keeping an eye on
Yep.
that. Well, I don't have any more major points on the show. So before we move into chart notes, do you guys have anything else you want to talk about before we move into that part?
I think I talked to Blue Street.
I have loved every second of this. This is great. We should really do this again.
Yeah.
All right. So chart notes. First thing, Mandy, the woman with the cockroach in her ear.
I hate you.
That was a big cockroach. I'm just saying.
I didn't look.
Me too.
I have a friend who will sneak videos to me knowing I'm going to watch them because they sent it, but every now and then they'll throw something that they know is going to freak me out. And one was a dude having his ear flushed and a living spider came out. And so as soon as he said there's something in your
Orthopod.
Yeah.
It seemed really big to be realistic. I'm sure it's happened before, but I don't think it's common.
You should have seen that spider.
Yeah.
Becky, I don't even know what you said because I took my headphones off. So
I said, I love Mandy Walker
yeah, that better be what you
more
said.
than anyone in this world.
God, I have a phobia about that. I love nature, science. I used to gross my, this is going to make you mad, Becky. I used to gross my sister by picking up slugs and putting them in my mouth. Bugs don't bother me, except roaches and maggots. Roaches and maggots are the only two bugs that I cannot stand. We used to have roaches in my house when I was little. I will never forget the day I was 6 years old and I went to go bite into Raisin Bran and the raisins moved. I was so mad at you when that roach came out of that woman's ear. I was cussing a blue streak at you.
I feel like your anger needs to be
at the people that made the show.
Yes, because I didn't like that any more than you did. I dig a medical procedure where we're cracking somebody open, but I don't want to see bugs coming out of people's orifices either.
So gross.
I've seen bugs in wounds. I've never seen them in an ear.
Wendy,
tell her, Wendy. Tell her all about it.
Up, Wendy.
Nothing strikes fear in a healthcare worker more than bed bugs. I'm just saying. Like C. diff, no problem. COVID, HIV, any of that stuff. We're fine. Bed bugs, forget about it.
That might make me run.
I don't want bed bugs, but the idea of them doesn't gross me out like a roach does.
Well, I know what I'm getting you for Christmas.
A roach and maggot farm?
I'm not going to tell you. You're just going to have to wait and see. Did anyone else think that security guard talking to the ambulance lady was really aggressive?
Well, I think, I don't know. And again, it could be wrong about this, but I'm glad you brought that up because that whole storyline was very funny about them betting on where the ambulance was going to eventually show up. I did think it was very aggressive because especially he was a large male and she was a short female. But I then started to think that those two know who's got the ambulance and may have been in on the theft of the ambulance.
I also feel like a hospital security guard would not care anything about the ambulance. Like, that's your problem.
Right.
That's a you problem. It's funny. It's some things that I've seen have been like, yeah, that would never happen. Like Noah Wiley chasing down the boy for 4 blocks outside of the ER. Never would happen. Once they hit that threshold, it stops.
He would have just called the school, right?
I mean, I would have called the police.
Yeah. Or the police, yeah.
Like once somebody tells me in this day and age, once somebody tells me there's a list of people I'm going to hurt.
For sure. Like I'm already on the phone with the cop. I'm dialing as you're talking.
And I can understand why you wouldn't want to get the police involved in certain circumstances, but that's kind of over the line. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. But I kind of think, Becky, that those two might be in on it because it felt like they were kind of acting. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I did think it was so cute that Kiara, the social worker, let her little self have a moment to place her bet. I thought that was super cute. Yeah. Dr. Robbie got to pee.
Oh my God.
I know. I have that in my notes. Yes. Thank God this man finally got to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
I thought the hair around the toe of the baby was a trip.
Yeah.
Both of you being mothers, did you ever?
Yes.
I've heard of it. I've never had that happen, but I have heard of it. I'm not peds at all. Like, I stay away from children in the healthcare setting. I mean, I did a peds rotation in nursing school, but I've never had that happen. But I've heard about that before.
I've had my kid have their toe tourniqueted just mildly, like I caught it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that is one of the things that they really stress to you and they check for when you're having, or at least when mine are 21 and 16 or 17 now, but when they were little, they did talk about that extensively, and especially with little boys, because there was a concern that it can get wrapped around their penis. So if your mom had long hair, and I did, the pediatrician would bring that up and to be careful about that.
I thought the scene where they were gathering the troops to go face the Kraken was very realistic.
It's very funny.
I feel like that's definitely happened where you're like, okay, at 8:00, we're getting everybody on the unit together, every single person available. In fact, call Unit 34 and ask them if they have a couple other people too. Like, that's definitely happened.
I love Dana in that moment.
Yeah.
She's the general and she's just getting the
I
troops
really
all together.
like her.
Me too. And
I do too.
Robbie's weaseling off in the background.
Well, she's like, "Do you want to help?" He's like, "Nope."
Yeah.
He just keeps on walking.
And I do think, like, in some ways, these medical shows are unrealistic because the reality is it is not normally the doctors that are on the floor at all. For the most part, it really is the nurses and the techs. But in the ER, it's very physician oriented. And I think that is mostly realistic.
Yeah, I know when I had my kids that I barely saw the doctor.
Yeah.
My nurses were both before, during, and after labor were my lifesavers.
Yeah. It's the nurses and the techs that are there.
Yeah.
That's just how it is, especially today. Like, a lot of doctors are working remotely and calling orders in. And the exception, like, so I'm in an inpatient hospice and the doctors are they're more involved than most normal hospital units. And it really is the team is like really physician led. And that's unusual. But it's like they're great at what they do.
I admire anyone who can do what y'all do.
Especially hospice.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating when I say you're like a rock star to me. I think you guys, what you do is some of the most important and hard work of anyone. I genuinely think most of us just don't have the stomach to be that realistic and compassionate about the end of life.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
That takes a courage, a strength, and a bravery. And
I feel like I think we're now coming to realize sometimes the toll that it takes on people.
I can't even imagine.
yeah.
It's not just hospice workers. I get a lot of people coming, like, for careers, people coming from ICU and acute care settings because they kind of feel like they've been torturing people for a while.
Yeah.
And hospice is kind of the antidote to that. And they'll come and they'll be like, I know it's weird, but I'm an ICU nurse and I think hospice is my calling. And I'm like, no, that's actually really common.
It seems like a natural progression.
Yeah.
And ERs. So like a lot of our best nurse referrals come from ERs and ICUs.
I think it takes a very special person to be able to constantly keep that empathy open for a patient and not destroy yourself. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm wording that correctly.
I think the younger physicians coming out of med school these days are managing to be both.
That's good.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I guess I'm saying I have empathy for all of them.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how hard it would be to constantly have to deal with things that I know for a fact the vast majority of the public, like, again, I think that's why so many people died in COVID is because the average person has a very hard time letting themselves be empathetic enough that you can put someone else's needs over your own. You guys, you specifically in your field, have to do that all day long. You have to deal with the most heavy thing that any human being ever goes through, which is death. And you're doing it all day and you're doing it with dignity and you're doing it with compassion and care. And you see the saddest shit. So I just can't imagine the trauma that is on your psyche all of the time. I don't know how you do it.
I mean, I'd say you get used to it, but I think it does have a toll. But I think you do get used to it. You know, it's like it's your work. But that doesn't mean that you lose your empathy. It just means that you're able to give it its time, put it behind you, and move on to the next case.
It's amazing what you do, and it's so important, and it's so needed.
Yeah, and I think the best thing we can do is talk about death and dying, talk about it when we're healthy. Most people don't want to talk about death and dying. They don't want to think about what they want when they die or when they get sick because they don't want to think about those things.
They'll do truly heinous shit, like abandon their family members because it's just too heavy for them psychologically to deal with.
So I think the best gifts you can give your loved ones is to make your wishes known. My mother-in-law didn't, give a lot of things, but what she did give to her kids is she was very outspoken about not wanting to be put on machinery.
Yeah.
When she had, a massive stroke and her brain was 3/4 dead, it made it easier for her kids, and she had 6 kids, to all come together. And, it made it easier because she made her wishes so well known. Now, that didn't stop other family members from saying terrible things about the decisions they made, which were really hers. They didn't make them. They were just following what she wished. But I think the more you talk about it, get a frickin' advance directive.
Yeah.
Put it in writing and just talk about it when you're healthy. Talk about who you want to make those decisions, because that's a thing that happens all the time. We will have a family that there might be 6 siblings. They have to, if no advance directive has been made and no power of attorney has been appointed, those 6 people have to decide, yes, I want my mom to be a do not resuscitate. And yes, I want my mom to go to hospice. And if they don't, she stays a full code. And she stays in the hospital. And, you have to know what you want. No one should be offended by that. You should get the medical decision maker that you want, and you should get the medical decisions that you want. It shouldn't be about what I want for my loved one. It should be what my loved one wants.
But it is so hard for a lot of people. Like, his grandmother, she was very surprised to find herself dying. And I have an uncle he's my favorite uncle. He's one of my heroes in life. He's an amazing person, but he doesn't do emotions well. And the way that he handles things is to try to try to take charge and work to solve problems. And so it became obvious she was going to need some kind of directive. And they had vaguely talked about it before, but that's what he did, is he went and he had something drawn up while she was in the hospital, and she was very ugly to him when he was getting her to sign it, because, and he had to tell her, Mom, you have very strict opinions about what you want, but you haven't put anything in writing to this point. It has to be done. There were 9 siblings in that family, and any 2 of them might get along, but 3 of them at the same time, was not happening.
Yeah,
let
alone
alone
hard.
9. He was just trying to make sure that she had what she wanted, but when she was already actively dying and she was terrified of dying and all of that, it was very stressful. And that, again, is where I started to really admire people in hospice, because it wasn't until hospice came in and we had mediators, for lack of a better word, who were able could understand her psyche and also the psyche of the family and what everyone was going through, and basically to be that buffer to help us understand each other. It brought so much peace at the very last time that your family needs to be fractured. I can't imagine what her death would have been like without hospice. It would have been so much more tragic without you guys.
Oh, thank you.
That's it.
All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to add about the episode?
Nope. I'm good. I still need to know who that baby's daddy is.
Took care of all my stuff. Yeah.
I need us to get back to that.
Guess we're going to find out.
It's driving me crazy. I did see them eye fucking each other again a whole lot in this episode, Becky. I noticed
Have you
quite a
both
bit of
watched
that.
ER?
Oh, girl.
That's her show.
I like that show.
Favorite medical drama of all time.
It's probably the only other one I've really gotten into. And I think I got into it before I became a nurse, so that's probably why. I started watching like The Resident or something, and I just found myself yelling because it was not very realistic. Yeah. But I feel like this show is really trying. And it's funny because I was rewatching some of the old ER episodes, and I was really impressed with how real they were keeping it.
I was going to ask you that.
Before the rocket launchers went off in the ER and stuff like that.
Helicopters falling on people.
Dr. John Carter's Becky's celebrity crush, but I quit watching it when Lucy died. I was it. I was out.
Oh gosh,
that's the best episode of ER. Not when she died, but
that whole arc.
Oh, unbelievable.
And did you guys watch Falling Skies?
No, I don't watch a
I
lot
did.
of TV. I just don't watch a whole lot.
Okay. We liked Falling Skies. I'm
My
not
mom did.
sure that we finished it.
I didn't finish the last season. It kind of went off the rails a little bit.
Yeah.
But I did really like it up to that point.
Well, thank you for having me.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, we did not get any feedback this week, but I hope one day we will.
Well, I'll definitely leave you feedback next week. Promise.
Yay! Thank you. Come back
Yeah.
on. But if you would like to leave us some feedback or just say hello, you can email or send us a voice message as an attachment to what's on tonight 2 at gmail.com. You can visit our Facebook page where there will be a post for the next episode. You can leave feedback in the comments section or send us a message through Facebook Messenger. We can also be found on Instagram at What's On Tonight Podcast 2. We would greatly appreciate it if you'd leave a review, comment, and or share on your podcast listening app of choice. So let's move on to podcast recommendations or anything else you want to share. Wendy, how about you?
Yellow Jackets is coming up. I'm psyched for
Me
it.
too.
February 14th, of course, Valentine's Day. What else would you be doing except watching cannibalism and yeah.
Be ready for my feedback.
Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm focusing on. White Lotus is also coming up soon. Yeah, I got into that last year. So I binged season 1 and then season 2 and I loved it.
It's good. Very, very good show. You got good taste.
Thank you.
How about you, Mandy?
I don't really have any podcast recommendations as usual, but I do want to point out for anybody living in Tennessee that our governor is holding a special session beginning January 27th, wherein he is trying to tie disaster relief funding for our most rural counties that were hit by the tornadoes this past fall to this voucher scam that is incredibly wildly unpopular with the voters of this state, including the vast majority who self-identify as conservative, because they can recognize that this is going to basically be double taxation and it's going to harm the very poorest of our communities and kids who need the public school systems funded the most. So I encourage you to find out who your state reps are and call them and let them know that you are not in favor of what is essentially going to be the dismantling of our public school system here in the state of Tennessee.
Yes, please. I can be heard on Adrenaline Cinema podcast. We recorded our coverage on the first 3 episodes of The Mayfair Witches last night. That was interesting and a lot of fun, so that should be released soon. Can also be heard on Panels to Pixels podcast and here on What's On Tonight. As far as recommendations, if you are having wicked fever, Billy and Will just released their coverage of the absolutely amazing movie musical and started listening to it, and it's really good coverage, so check it out. Over on Podtastica, Welcome to the Apocalypse is back. I did not realize it, and I just discovered that they're there and have binged their quick 30 minutes episodes, but it's an improv cast that covers 3 hilarious characters as they navigate their way through the apocalypse. If you haven't listened, please check them out.
It's really good.
It's so good.
It sounds like that movie, This Is the End, that came out 2010, something like that.
It is, but it's more comedy.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. And if you listen to it from the beginning, there's so many inside jokes that carry on from episode to episode. I save them without listening to them because I'm I don't
You want to listen to all of them at one time?
I'm a binger.
Or I just don't want it to be over. So
they're doing a great job. Want to give a big thank you to Mark and PowerCore Entertainment for giving us this platform and for all of your assistance. Please visit the PowerCore website. It can be found on our Facebook page, and there you can find our podcast as well as other podcasts like the Slay Lounge podcast with Billy and Will. And there you can find other projects that Mark is working on, so please go over there and check it out.
And that's going to wrap up our coverage of episode 4 of The Pit. We'll be back next week where we're going to break down episode 5 titled 11 a.m.
A huge thank you, Wendy, for coming on and being so amazing. Your insight, your thoughts, it was great having you. And I do hope that you will come back and do another episode with us sometime.
Yes, ma'am.
thank you for inviting me. It's really lovely.
Lovely isn't a word Mandy and I hear often. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. I'm Becky.
And I'm Mandy.
And I'm Wendy.
We'll catch you next week when we grab the remote and see what's on tonight.
Bye.